Hello everybody, it's Adrian here again.
And it's Bridget here again.
And this thing we're going to do today is called To the Moon and Back, which obviously is about love, which is really significant as we've just had a little row, haven't we?
Yes, I'm afraid we have.
We had to settle it fairly quickly because we had to do this, but no, we do. we settle our rows. Anyway, so yeah, that's a good way to begin, isn't it?
It is, but it also reminded you of something you actually wanted to say
Well,
to people.
it did. I have to apologise. The problem is that we do these things as they come out, mainly unscripted. Obviously, the poems and the sketches and things are already written, but most of it is just coming out of our heads, which is dangerous. And there was one thing I said over the last couple of days. Afterwards, I thought, oh no. I said we are in touch with all the people we love. Well, we are in touch, close touch with the family, our children and the people they're with. But there are loads and loads of people who we love very, very much, who we are not in touch with in that way.
I think he's grovelled enough, don't you?
Yeah, so do I.
One thing that's been interesting is that we've started getting comments from people about what ought we to call this. We were very flattered that somebody who's a good 50 years younger than us informed us we were doing a vlog. I didn't realise we were doing a vlog. I'm not sure we are.
What is a vlog?
Well, I think it's a video and a blog, and I don't think there's much video on it. But somebody else suggested, and I really like this, she reminded us that Miranda has talked about calling something a chamble, which is a sort of mixture of a chat and a ramble, which we rather liked. But if there's anyone with a better idea of a better name for what we're doing, well, we'd love to hear from you.
And of course, more important than any of that is the progress of the jigsaw, which has been a kind of running subject
non-story,
since
really.
we began. We are doing, as some of you know, a massive Monet jigsaw, which consists of tiny, tiny pieces which are all the same colour. And we'd like to give you a little heads up on the progress of that. Well, as you know, we did the straight bits. Bridget did a small corner. And yesterday, Bridget said, come and look at what I've done. And I went over to look at what she'd done, and I pretended to see it. It was, in fact, just a tiny, tiny little row of things, and I suppose it helps. But it's still, I don't know, must be 18 months away, the end of that.
Well, I think that was quite insulting, really, Adrian. I worked very hard on my tiny, tiny extension to the corner. But what is interesting is that we had a message from somebody who was saying they too are doing a jigsaw, but that they'd bought a jigsaw from their charity shop. And when they started to do it, they found that somebody had removed all the straight edges. Now that is a mystery, maybe one that won't be solved ever. Yeah. Why?
It could be a short story, couldn't it?
I suppose it could. And the other thing I think we were thinking about a lot, really, over the last day is how many huge statements every time we turn on the television. We're giving predictions of numbers. We're being told the situation all over the world. It's all so huge, such sweeping statements, so many big words. And we were thinking that can happen in the church as well.
Oh, it undoubtedly does. I mean, there is something that it's an odd mixture of intimidation and impressiveness that some speakers use, where they have thunderous concepts delivered in a thunderous voice. I heard one the other day saying, we have to go down into the roots of God in order to discover the heights of God. Well, all right, yes. And the trouble is, a lot of people are sitting and thinking, yes, I must go down into the roots of God so I can find the heights of God. But what on earth does it mean? Some years ago, I wrote a book called Looking Good, Being Bad. So we got the bit from it, which is about pulpy words, which is kind of on that subject. And the piece I'm talking about begins with a list of words that, although wonderful in themselves, can be very pulpy words. And Bridget, perhaps you could read the list of pulpy words.
Well, as you say, they're wonderful in themselves. Grace, love, obedience, faith, hope, truth, courage, reverence, humility, peace. Huge, wonderful concepts.
Fantastic words. Now, the point is that you can slip those words into almost any sentence and it makes a kind of sense, right? So I've got an example of that. Here we go. Right, listen to this. Maybe very moving and helpful for you. If we plant the seeds of grace in the good soil of love and water them with the fresh rain of obedience, we shall eventually reap the rich harvest of faith.
Well, that's lovely, isn't it?
It's very,
absolutely
very touching, yeah. Until you realise that if you reverse those same pulpy words in the same sentence,
Okay.
it still makes sense. If we plant the seeds of faith in the good soil of obedience and water them with the fresh rain of love, we shall eventually reap the rich harvest of grace. Amazing.
Which
isn't
is
it?
true as well, but I think you're beginning to get the point.
Now, even more worrying is that if you put all 10 words from that original list into a similar sentence, it sounds just the same. And here it is. When grace and love are confirmed by obedience, we find faith embraces truth, thus allowing hope and courage to develop the reverence that leads to humility and will finally achieve peace.
And if you reverse those, Adrian?
I know, I'm going to reverse. Here we go. When peace and humility are confirmed by reverence, we find that courage embraces hope, thus allowing truth and faith to develop the obedience that leads to love, and will finally achieve grace. You could go on and on and on forever, and none of that means anything.
Unless those words translate into action, unless we wrestle with them and seek them and let them become part of us, they will just remain what you described as pulpy words, really.
It is very worrying sometimes, and I've seen people sometimes, probably when I'm speaking, I have seen people with their brows furrowed in meetings sometimes, trying to pick apart things that are such broad brush strokes in terms of concept and faith and spirituality that I find it very difficult to understand.
Well, I think that broad brushstroke thing is an interesting way of putting it, because if you now come into each of our homes, into very small groups or on your own trying to communicate with people you care about, you realise that you're now using a very small brush, and small things matter. They always did, of course, but you become more and more aware of them. To the moon and back, I mean, what a concept is that? And it's something that, we understand, isn't it, Adrian?
Yeah, this is a little sketch we did a while ago, and we were actually used to Moon and Back as a title. Some people who are listening might actually have been at that weekend.
Oh, when we were at Scargill,
at
yes.
Scargill House in Yorkshire, yeah. Okay, so this is Bridget and I at home. Bridget?
Yes, Adrian.
I want to say something to you.
Yeah?
I want to say that I love you to the moon and back.
Oh, that's lovely. That's really good. Adrian, it's Monday. Have you put the recycling and the bottles out for the morning?
In a sense, yes.
In a sense?
Well, in the sense that I've used all the effort required to get the job done.
Uh-huh.
But
what?
I think I've actually put the general rubbish out.
Why?
Now that is a very, very good question.
Right, darling. If you really love me as much as you said, could you do something for me?
Yes.
Well, on your way to the moon...
On my way to... Oh, yes. Yes.
Could you take the recycling bin and the box of bottles and leave them outside the front door?
Right.
And then, on your return trip, just before you re-enter the atmosphere...
Yes.
Do you think you could bring the general rubbish bin back and put it in its little special place in the garden where it lives?
Yes, of course.
Good. That's one small step for a man and one giant leap for the available space in the bin cupboard, isn't it?
Very good. Yes. Very funny.
I suppose what we're saying really is that true love, real love, is always costly, whether it's in the small ways of just making sure that we look after each other practically, but sometimes it can be more than that.
It's so confusing. A friend of ours, I mean, in a sense, that little silly little sketch was influenced by a friend of ours who may be listening today, who knows, whose husband left her. And one day in church, shortly after that, somebody said to her, well, at least God's still with you. And she said, well, yeah, I still have to take the rubbish out on a Friday night, though. And I don't think she was being irreverent. The point she was making was that God actually doesn't come and do the stuff with you. Being with you is another thing. And that little confusion is really difficult for people sometimes.
But it does raise the question, doesn't it? If love is costly, how far should it take us to the moon? It's quite a long way. I'm just going to read from John 15:12-15, because in a way, this sums up what we're going to talk about. It's Palm Sunday today, and as you know, that's the day when Jesus rode into Jerusalem. And this is what Jesus said before he went. My command is this: love each other as I've loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. And in a way, that was what it was all about. He didn't just say the words. They were never pulpy words for Jesus. He always, I suppose you could say, put his money where his mouth was, really.
That's right, he did, yeah. And that ride into Jerusalem, interestingly, Bridget and I both wrote about that some years ago. And our view of that, they were quite different, weren't they?
They were.
Tell people about what you were saying.
Well, I suppose in both of the pieces that I wrote, I was thinking about the fact that in a way Jesus was the richest person in the world. He had access to everything he could possibly need, but again and again and again and again and again, he chose not to use them unless his Father was telling him that he wanted him to. So yes, there were amazing healings. Yes, there were incredible changes in people's lives. But always, always, he was understanding that obedience is not a pulpy word. And here we are with him coming into Jerusalem with crowds who've seen him raising Lazarus, who've heard about the miracles, who are expecting fireworks and who are very, very excited. And two things. One, in the heart of Jesus must have been the pain that nobody's going to understand. That actually his life is going to be spent, his suffering is going to be huge. But it will be at that time for people, even his closest friends, who really won't understand. And I think choosing a little donkey, I know it's to fulfill a prophecy, but I think it's a visual aid. I think it's an opportunity for people, once his last chance to say to people, this is what your Messiah looks like. Somebody who is accessible, somebody who's at the same height as you. When you ride on a little donkey, your feet aren't very far from the ground. Somebody who is going to love you to the moon. I suppose that was my thinking, that it wasn't a jolly day for Jesus.
Yeah.
The pain in his heart that he would never be able to help them to understand this side of death. And the other pain, full of fear, full of knowledge of what was going to happen. He knew the Pharisees were waiting for him and that they were out to get him, and they were going to get him to the moon.
Yeah, he was sandwiched between tears and death, tears before he entered Jerusalem and death to follow. And although, as you say that, I think, well, that's true. At the time when I wrote about it and thought about it, I was thinking that at least for a short time, he was allowed the thing that we are not allowed most of the time, which is to gain some of the feeling of celebration and glory about what you've done and what you're going to do, hurtful and dreadful though it is. But perhaps they go together. Perhaps in our lives they've gone together. Now I think about them at this moment, and that's a pattern I recognise, I think. Yeah.
Comes right back, doesn't it, to something we trot out so easily. God so loved the world. It's we say it a lot, and so it can lose its meaning. God so loved the world as he gave his only begotten Son. What's the last bit of it?
And whoever believes in him won't perish, but will live forever.
Yeah.
And that was the big picture that he was working towards, of course. I think it's very interesting, this combination of joy and despair, which is a part of Christian living. And we've often quoted the bit in the Bible where the angel comes to Mary and says, you are greatly blessed. And the Bible says immediately she was deeply troubled. And I think ever since then, for Christians, that has been the way we go. We are greatly blessed and deeply troubled. And sometimes you have to ride into whatever you've got to do, carrying those two things with you.
Yeah.
And that, I don't think that changes, really.
No. So when we look at those words again, grace and love and obedience and faith and truth and hope and courage and humility and peace, all of those
It all means
came in
something.
on a little donkey on
Yeah.
Palm Sunday.
Yeah. I hope you have a good day for the rest of the day. God bless you.
God bless. Bye.